You respond by defending your wife, I wrote. You respond by telling your mother that her behaviour is unacceptable. You respond by choosing the woman you married over the woman who raised you to believe that love comes with conditions. The 3 dots indicating he was typing appeared and disappeared several times before his next message came through. Where are you? I'm coming to get you. No, I replied. I need space to think. Don't try to find me. I turned off my phone and ran a hot bath, sinking into the water as I tried to process the surreal events of the day. This morning, I'd been Emma Whitmore, dutiful, wife and daughter-in-law, bending over backward to earn acceptance from people who would never give it. Tonight I was just Emma again, for the first time in 7 years. The next morning brought a new wave of reality. I checked my phone to find 63 missed calls and over 100 text messages. Most were from David, but there were also messages from various family members, all expressing shock, confusion, and in some cases, anger about my dramatic overreaction. But there was one message that caught my attention, sent at 3 in the morning from Patricia herself. We need to talk. This is ridiculous. You can't just give away a house because your feelings were hurt. I almost laughed at the sheer audacity of the message. Even now, even after discovering that she'd been living in my house for 4 years, Patricia still couldn't acknowledge that her behaviour had been anything more than a minor social faux pas. I got dressed and drove to my favourite coffee shop, a small independent place near the university where I'd spent countless hours grading papers and planning lessons. The familiar environment helped me think clearly about my next steps. My phone rang as I was settling into my usual corner table. Margaret Jen's name appeared on the screen. Emma, I just got off the phone with Patricia Whitmore's lawyer, she said. They're claiming the deed transfer was made under duress and want to contest its validity. On what grounds? I asked, though I wasn't particularly worried. I'd been completely sober and of sound mind when I'd made the decision. They're arguing that you were emotionally distraught and not capable of making such a significant legal decision, Margaret explained. It's a weak argument, especially since you discussed the transfer with me weeks ago, but they're desperate. Let them contest it, I said calmly. I have documentation of our previous conversations about the transfer, and there were 14 witnesses to Patricia's behaviour yesterday. If they want to make this public, I'm happy to let a judge hear about how she treated me. There's something else, Margaret said. They're also claiming that since you were married to David, the house should be considered marital property, regardless of whose name is on the deed. Colorado is not a community property state, I replied, and we have a prenuptial agreement that specifically excludes inherited property from marital assets. David insisted on it, actually, to protect his trust fund. I remember, Margaret said. That prenup is going to work in your favour now. But Emma, are you sure about this? Once the 5-year maintenance requirement kicks in and they start facing the real costs of ownership, they're going to be in serious financial trouble. That's not my problem anymore, I said, and meant it. Patricia wanted to be the lady of the manor. Now she can learn what that actually costs. That afternoon, I drove past the house, my former house, and was surprised to see several cars in the driveway. Through the front windows, I could see people moving around inside, and I wondered if the family was having some kind of emergency meeting to discuss their newfound predicament. My phone rang as I was sitting in my car across the street. It was Caroline, David's sister, calling for the first time in our 7-year acquaintance. Emma, this is insane, she said without preamble. You can't can't seriously expect our mother to maintain that enormous house. She's 63 years old. Your mother is the one who told me I was just the babysitter, I replied calmly. I assumed that meant she was ready to take on adult responsibilities. That's not... She didn't mean it like that, Caroline stammered. She was just upset about other things. You know how she gets during the holidays. I know exactly how she gets, I said. I've been experiencing it for 7 years. The question is, why are you calling me instead of talking to your mother about her behaviour? Because this is ridiculous. Caroline's voice rose to a near shriek. You're punishing our entire family because your feelings got hurt. I'm not punishing anyone, I said. I'm simply no longer enabling your family's treatment of me. Your mother wanted to be in charge. Now she is. But the house costs. I know exactly what the house costs, I interrupted. I've been paying for it for 4 years, while your family assumed it belonged to David. Now your mother can experience the joy of home ownership firsthand. I hung up and drove away, feeling lighter with each mile I put between myself and the house that had been both my sanctuary and my prison. That evening, I checked into a different hotel and began researching apartments. For the first time in years, I could choose where to live based on what I wanted, not what would be acceptable to David's family. I could get a small place near the school where I taught, or maybe something downtown with a view of the mountains. The possibilities felt endless. My phone buzzed with a text from David. The property taxes are due in January. That's $42,000. My mother doesn't have that kind of money, I typed back. Then she should have thought about that before calling me just the babysitter. Emma, please. This is destroying my family. Your family destroyed itself, I replied. I just stopped enabling it. 3 days later, Margaret called with an update. Patricia's lawyer contacted me again, she said. They want to negotiate a settlement. They're offering to publicly apologise and pay you a substantial sum if you'll take the house back. How substantial? I asked, curious despite myself. $500,000. I was quiet for a moment, considering the offer. $500,000 was a lot of money, enough to buy a beautiful home anywhere I wanted, and still have plenty left over for travel, investments, or anything else I might want to do. No, I said finally. Emma, that's a significant amount of money. It's not about the money, I said. It's about the principle. Patricia spent 7 years treating me like I was beneath her family's notice. She made it clear that she thought I was temporary, disposable, just a placeholder, until David found someone more suitable. Well, now she gets to learn what it's like to be responsible for something she can't just dismiss or ignore. And if she can't afford to maintain the property, then she'll have to make some difficult choices, I said. Maybe she'll learn to appreciate the people who actually work for a living instead of looking down on them. 6 weeks later, I was settling into my new apartment, a beautiful 2-bedroom place with hardwood floors and a view of the mountains, when Margaret called with news. Patricia's filed for bankruptcy, she said. The property taxes, combined with the emergency foundation repairs that couldn't wait, wiped out her savings. She's trying to sell the house, but the historical restrictions and disclosure requirements are scaring off buyers. What about David? I asked. Can't his trust fund cover the expenses? Apparently not, Margaret said. The trust has restrictions on how the money can be used, and bailing out his mother's real estate obligations doesn't qualify. Plus, I heard through the legal community that he's been cut off from additional family money until he sorts out his personal life. I felt a twinge of something, not quite sympathy, but perhaps recognition of the difficult position David was compliments at that Thanksgiving dinner. His years of choosing his family's approval over my dignity, and the feeling passed. There's something else, Margaret continued. David's been asking around about your new address. I thought you should know. Thank you for the warning, I said, but I'm not hiding from him. If he wants to talk, he knows where to find me. As if summoned by our conversation, my doorbell rang an hour later. Through the peephole, I could see David standing in the hallway, looking haggard and older than his 35 years. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. Emma, he said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. Please, we need to talk. About what? I asked, though I kept my voice neutral rather than hostile. About us, about our marriage, about fixing this mess. There is no us anymore, David, I said gently, and there's no mess to fix. There are just consequences to face. My mother is losing everything, he said desperately. The house, her savings, her social standing. This is destroying her. Your mother destroyed herself, I replied. I just stopped protecting her from the consequences of her choices. She's sorry, David said. She wants to apologize, to make things right. She's sorry she's facing bankruptcy, I corrected. She's sorry she underestimated the woman she called just the babysitter. But I don't think she's actually sorry for 7 years of treating me like I was beneath her notice. David was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with the truth of what I'd said. What do you want from me? He asked finally. Nothing, I said, and realised I meant it completely. I don't want anything from you, David. I want you to be happy, to find someone who fits into your family's world without having to change who they are. But that person isn't me. I love you, he said, the words sounding hollow even to him. You love the idea of me, I replied. You love having a wife who takes care of everything, who makes your life comfortable, who doesn't challenge your family's prejudices. But you don't love me enough to defend me when it matters. I closed the penalty door gently but firmly, leaving David standing in the hallway with the weight of his choices. 3 months later, I heard through mutual friends that Patricia had finally found a buyer for the house, a developer who planned to tear it down and build condominiums. The Historical Society was fighting the demolition, but Patricia was desperate enough to sell to anyone willing to take on the property's obligations. I felt a pang of sadness thinking about my great-grandfather's house being destroyed, but I also felt something else. Peace. The house had been a symbol of my family's history, but it had also become a prison where I'd lost myself trying to be someone else. Now I was free to create my own history, to build my own legacy, to choose my own family from people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. The babysitter had finally grown up and moved out, and for the first time in 7 years, I was exactly where I belonged. The end. Sometimes the cruelest words reveal the deepest truths. Emma's story reminds us that we teach people how to treat us, and sometimes the most powerful lesson is walking away from those who refuse to learn. The hotel room was quiet, except for the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. I sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing my Thanksgiving dress, staring at my phone as it buzzed with an endless stream of calls and text messages. David had called 47 times in the past 3 hours. Patricia had called 12 times. Even Caroline had tried to reach me, which was particularly surprising since she'd barely spoken to me in 7 years except to make passive-aggressive comments about my quaint lifestyle choices. I ignored them all. Instead, I called my lawyer, Margaret Chen, who had been handling my family's legal affairs since I'd inherited the house. Despite it being a holiday evening, she answered on the second ring. "Emma, I wasn't expecting to hear from you today. How was Thanksgiving dinner?" "Eventful," I replied, and found myself laughing, despite everything that had happened. "I need to ask you about the deed transfer we discussed last month. Is it legally binding?" "Absolutely," Margaret said, her voice becoming more professional. "You signed over the property to Patricia Whitmore this afternoon. Are you sure about this? That house is worth at least $2.8 million in the current market." "I'm sure," I said, surprising myself with how certain I sounded. "But I need to know exactly what she's inherited along with the property." "Everything we discussed," Margaret replied. "The house, the land, and all associated financial obligations. The property taxes alone are $42,000 annually, due in January. There's also the Historical Society preservation requirements, which mandate specific maintenance standards and materials. Any renovations or changes require approval from the Historical Committee, and violations carry substantial fines." I smiled, remembering the conversation we'd had about these obligations when I'd first considered transferring the property, and the foundation issues we discovered last month. The structural engineer's report estimated between $150,000 to $200,000 in necessary repairs within the next 18 months. Margaret said, "The historical designation means all work must be done by certified specialists using period-appropriate materials, which significantly increases the cost." "Perfect," I said, feeling a sense of satisfaction I hadn't expected. "And she can't simply sell the property to avoid these obligations?" "Not easily," Margaret explained. "The historical designation limits potential buyers, and the disclosure requirements mean any serious buyer would discover the financial obligations before closing. Plus, the deed transfer includes a clause that requires her to maintain the property according to historical standards for a minimum of 5 years, or face substantial penalties." After hanging up with Margaret, I finally allowed myself to think about what I'd actually done. I'd walked away from a house worth nearly $3 million, a house that had been in my family for 4 generations. But I'd also walked away from a family that had never valued me, a marriage that had been slowly suffocating me, and a life that had never truly felt like my own. My phone rang again. This time it was my best friend Jessica, calling from her own family gathering in Portland. "Please tell me you didn't actually give your house to that witch," she said without preamble. "I did," I replied, settling back against the hotel pillows, "along with all the financial obligations that come with it. Emma, that house is worth millions, and it costs hundreds of thousands to maintain," I said. "Money that Patricia doesn't have, by the way. David's trust fund is substantial, but not unlimited, and Patricia's been living beyond her means for years. I've seen their financial statements. David showed them to me last year when we were discussing our own budget." Jessica was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "So, you're telling me you just handed a financially struggling woman a house that's going to bankrupt her?" "I handed a woman who called me just the babysitter, the responsibility of caring for something she assumed belonged to her son," I corrected. "What she does with that responsibility is up to her." "You're diabolical," Jessica said, and I could hear the admiration in her voice. "I love it. But where are you going to live?" It was a good question, one I'd been avoiding thinking about. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But for the first time in 7 years, I get to decide without considering what David's family will think about it." We talked for another hour, Jessica helping me process the events of the day and the magnitude of the decision I'd made. When we hung up, I felt more centred message for a long moment, then typed back, "There's nothing to fix. This is who they are, and this is who you are when you're with them. I'm done pretending that's acceptable." His response came immediately. "You can't just throw away 7 years because of one bad dinner." "One bad dinner?" I typed back. "David, your mother has been undermining me for 7 years. She's questioned my worth, my background, my right to be in your family at every opportunity. And today, when she called me just the babysitter, you said nothing." Again, I was in shock. I didn't know how to respond. The way she said profession made teaching sound like something shameful, something beneath the dignity of the Whitmore family. I felt my cheeks flush with anger, but I kept my expression neutral. I'd learned over the years that reacting to Patricia's provocations only gave her more ammunition. "Teaching is a noble profession," Margaret said firmly, and I shot her a grateful look. "We need more dedicated educators like Emma." "Oh, absolutely," Patricia agreed with false enthusiasm, though, of course, it's not quite the same as having a real career, is it? More of a temporary situation until one settles into their proper role. "Teaching is my proper role," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. "I love what I do, and I'm good at it." "Of course you are, dear," Patricia replied with that patronising smile, though I do wonder, sometimes, if David wouldn't benefit from a wife who could contribute more significantly to the family's social standing. Someone who understands the importance of appearances, of maintaining certain standards. The table fell silent except for the clink of silverware against china. Even the children seemed to sense the tension, their chatter dying down as they looked between the adults with confused expressions. David cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mum, I think I'm simply saying," Patricia continued, cutting off her son's weak attempt at intervention, "that some people are naturally suited to certain roles in life. Emma is very capable in her own way, but let's be honest about what she is." She paused dramatically, making sure she had everyone's attention before delivering what she clearly considered the killing blow. "She's just the babysitter." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, poisoning everything they touched. I felt as if I'd been physically slapped, the casual cruelty of the statement taking my breath away. Around the table, family members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some looking down at their plates, others staring at Patricia with expressions ranging from shock to embarrassment. But it was the silence that hurt the most. David's silence, Caroline's silence, the silence of a family that was willing to watch me be humiliated rather than risk confronting their matriarch. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly quiet house. My hands were remarkably steady as I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope I'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment. "You're absolutely right, Patricia," I said, my voice calm and clear. "I am just the babysitter, which is why I think it's time for the real homeowner to take responsibility." I walked around the table to where Patricia sat, her face showing the first signs of confusion as she tried to understand what was happening. I placed the envelope directly in front of her, the papers inside rustling softly. "What is this?" she asked, her voice losing some of its earlier confidence. "The deed to this house," I replied, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The house that's been in my family for 4 generations. The house my great-grandfather built with his own hands. The house I inherited from my grandmother, along with everything in it. face went white as she opened the envelope and saw the legal documents inside. Around the table, family members leaned forward, trying to understand what was happening. "That's impossible," Patricia whispered, scanning the papers with growing horror. "David said he told us this was his house." "David has never owned this house," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. "He's never made a mortgage payment, never paid property taxes, never even been on the deed. This house, this furniture, these dishes you're eating from, all of it belongs to me." I looked around the table at the shocked faces of David's family, people who had spent years treating me like an unwelcome guest in what they assumed was their son's home. For 7 years, I've listened to you question my worth, my background, my place in this family. You've made it clear that you think I'm beneath you, that I don't deserve to be here. Well, congratulations. You finally convinced me. I walked back to my chair and picked up my purse, my movements deliberate and calm despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. "The house is yours now, Patricia," I said, looking directly at my mother-in-law's stunned face. "Since you think I'm just a babysitter, you can figure out how to maintain it, how to pay the taxes, how to handle the upkeep. Consider it your early Christmas present." "Emma, wait." David finally found his voice, standing up and reaching for me. "You can't be serious. This is our home." "No," I said firmly, stepping away from his outstretched hand. "This was my home, my sanctuary, my family's legacy. But you've all made it very clear that I'm not welcome here, so I'm leaving." I walked toward the front door, my heels clicking against the hardwood floors that my great-grandfather had installed nearly a century ago. Behind me, I could hear the eruption of voices, Patricia's shrill protests, David's desperate pleas, the confused questions of family members trying to understand what had just happened. But I didn't look back. I walked out of the house that had sheltered 4 generations of my family, got into my car, and drove away from the life I'd tried so hard to build with people who had never wanted me in the first place. As I drove through the quiet streets of the neighbourhood where I'd grown up, where my grandmother had taught me to garden and my mother had pushed me on the swing set in the backyard, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Freedom. The smell of roasted turkey filled the air as I carefully arranged the cranberry sauce in my grandmother's crystal bowl, the same one I'd inherited when she passed away 5 years ago. Everything had to be perfect for Thanksgiving dinner, not because I was a perfectionist, but because I knew Patricia would be watching, waiting for any excuse to criticize me in front of the entire family. Patricia Whitmore, my mother-in-law, had never liked me from the moment her precious son David brought me home 7 years ago. I wasn't the debutante she'd envisioned for her eldest child. I was a public school teacher from the wrong side of town who had the audacity to fall in love with her Harvard-educated son. But what Patricia didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the house they were sitting in, the house where we'd hosted every family gathering for the past 4 years, wasn't David's inheritance or his purchase. It was mine. "Emma, darling," Patricia's voice cut through my thoughts like a knife wrapped in silk. "Don't you think the table setting is a bit ambitious for someone of your background?" I looked up from the dining room, where I'd spent 3 hours arranging place settings for 14 people. The china was my grandmother's spode. The silverware was sterling silver that had been in my family for 3 generations, and the crystal glasses had been a wedding gift from my late aunt. But Patricia saw what she wanted to see, a woman she considered beneath her family station, trying too hard to impress. "I think it looks lovely," I replied, keeping my voice voice steady despite the familiar knot forming in my stomach. "Of course you do, dear," Patricia said with that condescending smile she'd perfected over 63 years of looking down on people. "Though I do worry about using such expensive pieces when you're not, well, when you're not used to handling fine things." My husband David walked into the room carrying a bottle of wine, his face already showing the strain that appeared whenever his mother visited. He'd grown up under Patricia's critical eye, and even at 35, he still sought her approval, like a child desperate for a parent's love. "Mum, please," he said quietly. "Emma's done a beautiful job with everything." "Oh, I'm not criticising," Patricia replied, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm simply observing that some people are more naturally suited to entertaining than others. It comes from breeding, you understand." The doorbell rang, saving me from having to respond to that particular barb. Soon, the house was filled with David's extended family, his sister Caroline and her husband, his uncle Robert and Aunt Margaret, his cousins and their children. The noise level rose as conversations overlapped, children ran through the hallways, and the adults settled into their usual patterns of interaction. I moved between the kitchen and dining room like a choreographed dancer, ensuring everyone had drinks, that the appetizers were replenished, that the children had juice boxes and crackers to tide them over until dinner. This was my element: hosting, caring for others, making sure everyone felt welcome and comfortable. It was something I'd learned from my own grandmother, who had taught me that hospitality was an art form that came from the heart, not from a bank account. "Emma's certainly energetic," I heard Patricia say to her sister-in-law Margaret as I passed by with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. "Though I do worry she's trying too hard. It's almost as if she's playing house, pretending to be something she's not." Margaret, who had always been kinder to me than the rest of David's family, looked uncomfortable. "She seems to be doing a wonderful job, Patricia. The house looks beautiful, and everything is so well organised." "Oh yes, she's very domestic," Patricia replied, the words sounding like an insult in her mouth. "I suppose that's what happens when you marry someone from that sort of background. They're used to doing the work themselves, rather than having people to do it for them." I set the tray down harder than necessary on the coffee table, causing a few crackers to slide off their carefully arranged positions. Several family members looked up, but I forced a smile and continued my rounds, pretending I hadn't heard every poisonous word. The afternoon wore on with Patricia continuing her subtle campaign of undermining me in front of the family. When I brought out the homemade dinner rolls, she commented on how quaint it was that I still baked from scratch. When I mentioned that I'd grown the herbs for the stuffing in my own garden, she observed that it must be nice to have such simple hobbies. Every compliment was wrapped in condescension, every observation designed to remind everyone present that I was an outsider who didn't quite belong. David tried to deflect some of his mother's comments, but his efforts were half-hearted at best. He'd grown up in this family dynamic, where Patricia's word was law and challenging her directly was unthinkable. I'd learned over the years that expecting him to truly stand up to his mother was like expecting the sun to rise in the west. Theoretically possible, but practically impossible. As we sat down for dinner, I felt a familiar exhaustion settle over me. This wasn't just about one difficult meal. It was about 7 years of being made to feel like an interloper in my own life. 7 years of having my worth questioned and my place in the family challenged at every turn. The conversation conversation during. Dinner followed predictable patterns. Patricia held court at one end of the table, regaling everyone with stories about her charity work and social obligations. Caroline discussed her children's achievements at their private school. Uncle Robert talked about his latest business ventures. I contributed when I could, but mostly I focused on making sure everyone's plates were full and their wine glasses topped off. "Emma, you've outdone yourself," said Cousin James, raising his glass in my direction. "This turkey is incredible, and these sides are restaurant quality." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely pleased by the compliment. "I'm glad everyone's enjoying her." "She certainly knows her way around a kitchen," Patricia interjected, her tone making it clear that this wasn't necessarily a good thing. Though, I suppose that's to be expected from someone in a profession.